and hopefully we can hear it. There it is. Don't sue us, Los Fabulosos Cadillacs, El Matador. Can we hear that? This is high tech music editing right here. As long as they don't sue us, I am lucky. Okay, okay. I like it. Random. Is this what you work out to?
Sometimes. So this ended up being a key piece of music in the film Gross Point Blank, which
Mm.
is my favorite movie of all time. And
I
so,
that's
yeah.
it's in my top. I can say it's probably my top three, but my wife doesn't like it, so I had to like lower it a little bit.
Okay.
But
Okay. Yeah.
that's a dark comedy for anyone not familiar. Little John Cusack plays a hitman, goes to his high school reunion. Definitely one of my absolute favorites. Mini Driver. Good times, good times.
Yeah.
Got me reminiscing. I haven't watched it in a while, but I'm excited to introduce my child to it once they're born. Definitely on the list. Anyway, but we're lucky enough to be joined by Robb Wolf, and all the musical stuff aside, we're here to solve the biggest problems in the world. We're trying to figure out if there's hope for humanity, and Robb Wolf has a unique skill set to answer that question. The Libertarian podcast. I already forgot the name of it. I'll be honest, but I definitely listen to every episode. When you had that, you definitely went the way of the dodo there. That's a reference from Grosse Point Blank, I believe.
That is a reference from Gross Point Blank. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I don't know if my brain did that
10
unintentionally.
years.
I didn't even like. um, was it Bujo the dog? Was it?
Yeah.
Anyway, for anyone not familiar with the movie, go check it out. But yeah, what happened to I did want to know what happened to the Libertarian. Was just too much politics?
It was no. Funny enough, both Dave Dooley and I, and the name of the podcast is The Controversial Truth, or was The Controversial Truth. Dave ended up getting a really legit day job in that he's the CEO for this thing called Plan Gap, which is basically he owns the intellectual property around gap insurance as it relates to Social Security and all pension type things. Like he managed to get this like process patent around this stuff. And funny enough, he came up with this idea when he was up hanging out with my wife and I in Reno, probably about 6 years ago. And he was just like, "Hey, what do you think about this? Gap insurance on Social Security first, but then pensions broadly, because like 85% of pensions are underfunded and are actually, there's all these people that are working their asses off so that they can retire with the golden handshake. And then the vast majority of them are going to discover that there's not nearly enough money in those things to do what they hope it's going to do. And hopefully Dave's solution to that will prevent civil unrest and all kinds of craziness. But Dave, we expunged all of that off the internet because Dave had to get funding and investors and all that type of stuff, and we didn't want to leave too much of a paper trail of our attempt at saving Western liberal democracy. So
yeah, and I would say I'm a very novice, politically minded person, and like I try to keep up with it. I don't go too far either direction, obviously, and the concept of libertarianism, probably listening to your podcast, was the most I got into that. And again, like that was, and so for anyone not familiar with Robb, the Paleo guy then became the Keto guy, and now he's the salty guy. And we're drinking our LMNTs here. We got the Yeti, and
yeah.
I just got that bottle as well from you guys. Thank you. So LMNT takes care of its vendors very nicely. And if anyone wants free sample pack, you can go to drinklmnt.com/fitcare to get your free sample today.
There you go.
And we both get some goodies. But yeah, Robb also, so first and fourth ever CrossFit gyms in the world, had his little black box summit with the CrossFit people, but now you're back. You seem to have rehashed. You did
I was back briefly, and then I don't. God bless CrossFit and in all of its various forms, but they wanted to bring me back in, and then apparently there was some sort of backpedaling on that, and so I actually bowed out gracefully this time instead of getting pitched out the door again.
And anyone not familiar with the controversy and all that, basically, again, like one of the prophets of doom, so to speak. Would that be fair to say? You and
probably
Greg Ever, I think it was 2009 Black Box Summit in Texas. Anyone not familiar with their history here, and you guys basically stood up and you're like, "Hey, can we regulate this thing a little bit?" And Dave
And
Castro.
even beyond, not even like regulate, but we were making the crazy case that if you wanted to run a business, so you've run brick and mortar businesses, and they're just as hard to run if they're a pile of steaming feces or if they're really buttoned up and doing well. One of them will pay you well, one of them won't. Both of them are a huge liability risk in a variety of ways, or a huge time suck. And we were just throwing out there this idea that maybe there are some best practices that would allow people to go from barely scraping by to just having, a well-run business. So it wasn't even really suggesting that like HQ have some regulations, but more that they would say, hey, you probably should have some business software to run this thing, like billing. You might think about an on-ramp program so that new people, aren't burned out on day one and injured and all that type of stuff. And as time has gone on, it's completely borne that out. And, CrossFit was unfortunately run more like a Ponzi scheme than the world-changing thing that it is and it could have been. And
Yeah. A lot of stuff there. Just again to keep the story going of anyone not familiar with Robb, as I know the story anyway. So him and Greg Everett, who is Catalyst Athletics,
Mhm.
they were the two kind of not so good at Black Box Summit. Moving on from that, less CrossFitty. You guys had your own podcast. I think that was the first probably podcast I was ever subscribed to. And I don't know if that makes you feel old or ages you, but sorry about that. But yeah, podcasting, relatively new thing, kind of went from blogs to podcasting, all that jazz. And then, and I still love the lines, is it bringing down property values everywhere he's gone, and
Right.
also having your six listeners, all the classics, all the hits today. So do you still keep in touch with your 6 listeners? I probably was one of the 6. I guess I kind of in theory was. But
There is a rotating group of possibly more than 6 people that will email and they're like, hey, one of the original 6. And yeah.
Yeah, and so they would just field questions, and they Robb's been kind of doing that since whenever that was, early 2010s, I guess.
The 2010 is when we launched the podcast. Yeah, and
That
it was really just trying to figure out, like, we had a deluge of questions, and a lot of them were a lot of overlap. Like there was 80% of overlap with a lot of these things, and so instead of answering it once for one person, first I started blogging about the questions, and it's always been interesting to me. And I don't want to divert this too far down this, but it's the unfortunate side of social media that has become such a weird place, because the questions are really where I continue to learn from folks. Like if I've got a group of 1,000 people that are really well engaged and they understand kind of like what I'm thinking because they've read some of my books and read some blogs and listened to podcasts, and they go out in the world and they're checking different things out and kicking tires on things, then I've got like 1,000 research assistants going out, checking things out. And then they're like, hey, this is a new thing. What do you think about it? And so it's a really amazing way to stay on top of things and to learn new material, new ways of looking at stuff. And so I always, it's funny when somebody gets a New York Times bestselling book or something, and the advice is like, create this distance between yourself and your followers. You need to become inaccessible and don't answer questions. And I've always loved answering questions. Like I would spend 3 or 4 hours a day on the back end of Instagram or Facebook. Like people would just have questions and I'd do my best job to answer them. I actually took it as part of my job to do that, and I didn't approach that stuff as like a popularity contest. It was literally like, if I can help enough people, then they will find enough value in the rest of my work that they will patronize me. And that generally has worked out really well.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, again, you've been doing that since 2010, and you still have a podcast where pretty much weekly you're answering more questions, and you do like 3 questions or so. Now your co-host is your wife, Nikki, and the Healthy Rebellion. And every time I listen to it at the beginning, I'm like, it definitely again resonates with me at the very least that. Make your health an act of make your health an act of rebellion. And I always love those concepts of like we need to revolt, we need to have like change the system. My other podcast is the Demand Better podcast, and we're saying like demand better from this system that we currently have. And again, Robb here is been yelling it from the the rooftops or the
The gutter
the
generally,
gutter,
but yeah.
yeah. We want to say the rooftops, but yes, and it's crazy because yeah, you get this fan base and you hear the things, and it makes so much sense when we hear you talk. But then it doesn't go past a certain point, and that's the frustrating thing. The most recent book, Sacred Cow. Let's jump over to that. So, and again, I one of the last times I saw you in person was evolutionary biology talk at SUNY New Paltz,
Mhm.
upstate New York. And you kind of helped set up that whole curriculum, if it were,
Yep.
and that's a huge piece of this whole thing. And again, the paleo thing went by the wayside in terms of its popularity, more or less, in regards to like we shouldn't eat like cavemen. Cavemen didn't live very long, and all you've heard all the fun back and forth there. So
Yep.
but still, evolutionary biology, understanding that, studying that, and how then we can take the lessons from that and apply it to modern day. And so I still think of all the folks I listen to, the many podcasts and stuff I take in. You're still one of the best and again, that's I was like, oh, I can just book on a link here to have this guy on my podcast. Cool. Like there's no filtration
No
system.
quality control, no standards, no.
So I did appreciate that, and it's like maybe there's something wrong here, but no, it's happening. So here we are. But yeah, you're still one of the best to synthesize all this, and I'm almost
Thank you.
trying to keep you from going into the tangents, which you do, but it's always useful and it's always good, in the sense that like it's common sense, and you go down this path of thinking, and I would bet you could go head toe to toe with pretty much any of these top politicians, and that I guess that's another pseudo question that folks like me, your fans, we can call it, the Wolfies. I don't know if there's a name,
The wolf
but
pack.
Wolf Pack. Yeah, that would be an easier one, I guess. But yeah, I assume you're never going to deal with politics. I'll throw that out.
You know what's funny is I had swore that I never would, and then I was actually talking to my jujitsu coach, and he was like, "You need to really get into some local politics at some point, like even at like the public health and food security level, like
Mm,
really pushing." So I live in Montana, and there's this interesting dynamic where we have a lot of people that have acreage that they dedicate to like grazing animals of different types, mainly cattle, but there's a lot of bison, there's a lot of sheep. There's a lot of thought around like elk and deer and the native flora and fauna and everything. And then there's this other side of this story where the folks that are doing that and have been doing it for maybe like 8 generations, like really a remarkably long time, to say nothing of the native peoples who live in these areas like the Blackfoot tribe and whatnot. They're being vilified for this animal husbandry stuff, which kind of ties into the sacred cow. And we have a public health crisis of people overeating calories, under eating nutrition. And Montana is one of these places where we could produce monumental amounts of animal product foods and do it in a sustainable way and make the land better than what it was. Like, if we don't screw everything up, we could come back 5,000 years from now and the grasslands could be better, the ecosystems could be better, the human population could be healthier and better. And even though I've had some influence from being the peanut gallery out doing stuff like this, like my jujitsu coach was actually like, you really need to consider doing some sort of like state or local level politics at some point to be able to grease the skids on this stuff. And it's I forget the exact number on this, but something like 89% of people in politics now have a JD. They have a
mm,
law degree, and there's less than 1% of people in politics that have a hard science degree,
mm,
chemistry, physics,
yeah.
engineering, which I'm biased that way, but I have this sneaky suspicion that if you don't understand thermodynamics, evolution, economics, you literally have no idea how the world works.
Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, famous science fiction author, made this observation that a sufficiently advanced civilization would be indistinguishable from magic for a less
Hmm.
advanced civilization. And I see that somewhat like this, in that people who, and I'm not talking down to them, but like if you have no idea about the way that your refrigerator works, like no math involved, but just the basic idea that some electricity is going in, a pump is moving some stuff around to pump heat from one area to another area to make one area colder and another area hot. If you don't have a little bit of a grasp of that, there's huge tracts of the world that if somebody said, hey, I think we should do 100% wind turbine driven electricity and we're going to store it all in batteries, like, do you have a background that can assess that? Even at just like a very, like I remember in my undergrad, there was a physics for poets class. So it was no math in it. It was all conceptual based. But God, people came out of that with a really good understanding about like thermodynamics and heat flow and energy and the limitations of physical space. Like you can only pack so much energy density into a battery without to get more energy density, it needs to become like radioactive material or something. And I know I've kind of like diverted off into the weeds, but yeah, that was a long answer to, I may actually
the
think
answer
about
is
doing some local
no.
politics.
The real answer is you're never going to make it in politics because you can't stay on topic.
Because I can't stay on topic. Yeah. And I actually answer things directly. Yeah.
And again, these are right. That's the fun part. One of my high school football teammates actually was just trying to run for governor of New York, and he was on a little bit of a religious thing. But we have like a monthly catch up with all of our high school football buddies, and he jumped on there. He hadn't been on there, and of course he's running. He kind of wanted to get our votes or push our thing and touch base with us. And yeah, we would ask him a question like, "Hey, how you been?" And he's like, "Well, that's interesting you asked that." And then he would go into the completely political. I was like, "Wow, you definitely got the political
the polish."
The polish going. Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see it like with people you grew up with and people like you really you have that kind of connection with. But it's like, wow, it's really a thing. And so yeah, the whole political game is a fun piece of that equation. But yeah, it's I mean, obviously I think you'd have a lot of folks who probably don't live where you live who who'd be ready to vote for you. But yeah, it's a crazy system. The other piece that takes us to is this whole regenerative farming piece. So Sacred Cow's kind of making the argument for that. And you seem to like to take on these battles of, especially with the nutrition folks. We call them zealots, I guess. And folks really like to argue about it. And you guys actually put out the movie and the book, right? Of Sacred Cow, and really making the argument that it is possible for us to make improvements in how we raise animals. And the argument before was this is how we should be eating. This is how the earth is meant to be. There's actually carbon negative pieces and versus kind of all the money. And we bring up game changers as the ultimate kind of example of the antithesis of what you're doing or what you did. And I remember you did one of the takedowns of game changers. And like, anytime I talk to that, and I've had plenty of folks come to me and like, hey, I'm thinking of switching a plant-based diet. I saw this game changers thing. It seems really good. And I'm like, okay, here's 17 things, and like, how do we get you to change your mind? And again, that's one of the other things I always kind of defer to you and keep going to someone like you as like, help me understand how to affect these people, because you're doing it on a daily basis. You're making change. You're being consistent with everything we're talking about here. But it is, when do we get to like a critical mass of saying like, the things he's saying are hard to argue. Like this is the science, folks. And again, it's not, I know you talked about it before and you got into the COVID thing with all sorts of fun stuff, which I don't know if we want to open up that can of worms, but
we can. I mean, it's topical. And I had a quip the other day, which was the 2029 postmortem on COVID is going to be really fascinating. When we have 10 years of looking back and looking at excess death, all-cause mortality, economic impacts, educational impacts on our children, suicide, on and on and on. Like it's going to be really interesting to see if the pivot. And I'll just throw this out there. We had a pandemic response process that didn't involve lockdowns, did not involve population level masking, did not involve population level vaccination mid-pandemic, because there's a lot of concerns around that with like original antigenic sin and antibody dependent enhancement. And we can dig into that stuff if you want to a little bit. and none of that was the standard of care. That was never part of the way that we were historically supposed to respond to a pandemic. And then for some damn reason, we pivoted on a dime in this case and instituted mass vaccines mid-pandemic, there are really legitimate concerns about why one might not want to do that from an immunological perspective. There was never a thought that shutting down global economies was a good idea. It was never thought that pulling kids out of school was a good idea. There's safety and mitigating strategies, like in the 1918 flu pandemic. What they simply did is move kids outdoors, and that largely halted that whole process, and instead we shut down outdoor areas and arrested people for paddleboarding at the Santa Monica Pier. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's such a train wreck. I don't know how far you would want to go into it, but I think that there's just some stuff there that folks didn't. I'll throw this out there really quickly. We were in Costa Rica right as COVID was emerging kind of globally. Like, we literally got in just before things started locking down, and I had really followed SARS-CoV-1 and also MERS, because those viruses, although very difficult to catch, have like a 30 to 40% case fatality rate. No joke, like no fiddling the numbers, no funny business there. If 100 people get it, like 30 to 40 of them die. The other people who survive are really, really sick, and it's pretty uniform. And I'm a little bit of a geek about thinking, considering like existential threats, like EMP pulse, either generated from a nuclear weapon or like a coronal mass ejection from the sun that could wipe out our whole power grid, fry every circuit board, and we would basically be back to like a late 1800s level of technology overnight. It would be catastrophic. And so, like, I don't like fixate on this stuff, but I think about, like, okay, if there was a big earthquake, what would I do to deal with that? If there was a wildfire in the area that I live in, which is prone to that, what would I do with that? And then some of these bigger existential threats. And so when SARS-CoV-2 started emerging, like, my wife and I updated our wills. We contacted people that are in our estate planning, and like, if both of us died, this is what happens with the kids. We took it super seriously. And then it was maybe April of that first ramp up that when the word from like CDC, World Health Organization, was that we were going to have these novel vaccines that were going to be the sole response to this problem. It was like my hound dog ears just kind of like, really? And because we've never had success making a vaccine in this class of viruses. Folks have been trying to make vaccines for SARS-CoV-1 and MERS, and it never succeeded. The animal experiments always ended up with these original antigenic sin and antibody-dependent enhancement issues that ended up killing the animals. To say nothing of this like novel therapeutic, application of mRNA. And again, like, when you think about existential threats, like when in World War II, when the Manhattan Project was spun up to create an atomic bomb, because the Nazis, like actual real, like legitimate Nazis, were trying to make an atomic bomb, and whoever won that race was going to win the war ultimately and kind of win the world. They didn't do one process with that. They created a team of people, and that had like 4 or 5 different angles that they were trying to tackle this problem, because nobody knew exactly what the right answer was. They didn't even know if it was possible to make an atomic bomb. And then the people who thought that we could make an atomic bomb, about 10% of them thought that if you ignited an atomic bomb in the atmosphere of the Earth, it would ignite the atmosphere and we would become a star for 20 or 30 minutes until all of the visible material in the atmosphere was gone, and then everybody would be dead. And so there was actually like a lot of interesting stuff even around that, and I didn't see any of that around COVID. There was like this one answer, one solution. We're going to coerce you to do it. We may make you lose your job if you don't do it. And there were a lot of things. So I went from like preparing for my death to being one of these people that was getting, shadow banned and blocked for mainly asking questions. Like I rarely made any definitive statements about anything. I just asked a lot of questions, and that was enough to really piss off both, people out there and kind of the powers that be.
I've learned that with my wife too. If I ask a question, I better do it the right way, or you can't just ask a question.
Is your wife Italian by chance?
No,
Okay,
Lebanese,
okay.
similar,
Lebanon.
similar,
Okay, okay.
passionate
Yeah,
things going on there,
yeah.
responses. But hey, we're not talking bad about anyone. So that brings us to: do we have any hope, Rob? Do we have any hope for the future? Should I go and learn how to bow hunt and and is that we need to become survivalists and hunt for our food, or what's the where are we? Can I not rely on Costco for the rest of my life? What are we doing? What are we doing?
I think so. I was in the Northridge earthquake. I was in Long Beach, 1994, and the Northridge earthquake happened. And fortunately, where we were wasn't as affected as other areas, but we had no water for maybe 3 days. In the apartment that I lived in, there were some other issues there. And after that, I always, while I lived around California and Nevada, because of the potential for, like, the big one, the mega earthquake, to say nothing of like fires and stuff like that. I started in the 90s, mid 90s, just having a little bit of a resiliency plan, like a go bag where
Mhm.
passport, important documents, things that I would really be, I have over here a book that has like my family tree that both my parents had filled out, where my great grandparents were born and different things like that. Like I would be crushed if I lost that thing. So
Right.
I started doing some stuff like that. And then in 2008 with the financial crisis, it kind of ratcheted my game up. I don't think it's ever a bad idea to have some extra food on hand, some
Mhm.
water on hand, some thought about how you could, have some backup options around that, like buying some of these like water filtration straws,
Mhm.
and hopefully you never use it.
Right.
But I think that a little bit of resiliency planning like that is not a bad idea. But then for the vast majority of people, the reality is that we need really good community. We need good connections. If things did go sideways, with like supply chains or something like that, like you're not gonna, if you are the person that is off in some remote cabin in the woods, you're the person that all the hillbillies around you are gonna come like take you and your shit first, because
Right.
you're this singular entity. So it still is going to come back down to community. It's going to come back down to the connections we have and the people that we know. Just as an aside, like during the 2008 financial implosion, the folks that were members of our gym, CrossFit NorCal at that time, they remained members of the gym because of the support, and also like they found work through the gym. Like
Mm.
people networked and they found things, even if it was like an odd job of like cutting a couple of cords of wood for somebody. These were people who were like real estate agents one day doing 20 grand wine country weekends in Napa, to like, oh shit, like I'm not sure how I'm gonna feed
Mhm.
myself, but that community was a huge deal. So I am really optimistic, and it's kind of funny. It circles back around to your somewhat whimsical question about politics, but I think that if we focus on trying to change things at like a federal level, we're done. Like
Yeah.
you're literally the bug against the windshield, but we can have massive impact on like our school systems and local food systems, and if we have a homeless issue or underserved populations in our local areas, we can have a massive impact on that and do a lot of good. And then there is a reality that best practices can and oftentimes do trickle their way up to higher up within organizational systems. But I think that people get bamboozled into thinking that like the presidential election is the place to focus, and
Right.
what's going on there, whereas we can have massive impact at a local level. And so my hope is that more people get more involved with both local community, and that could be churches, it could be gyms, it could be a whole host of different civic activities, but also that they get a little bit more networked and tied together at a local level. And I think that that's how we motor forward in this stuff. And I also, when you think about it, what are most people pining for? Like, they don't really want another scroll through Instagram. They don't want another like Facebook post with somebody who they're like, I don't know if this guy's life is really that good, but like actually having some contact in the real world and real life community and everything. I think that that's what all of us on some level want. My wife does. She is kind of a misanthrope, and so she's very selective in the people that she wants to connect with. But the people she wants to connect with, they're the most important things in her life. Right. So they are the reason that makes life worth living and provides value to us.
Yeah. Even the introverts need folks, and yeah, 100%. Yeah, and when I was in Dubai, I was in Dubai for 2.5 years, and folks, when I came back to the U.S., were like, "How was it? How it looks amazing," and I'm like, it was not that good. It's like, it's not what you see on Instagram, and it's like, yeah, we can talk deeper on that. But yeah, you make some really powerful points about connection, community, and that is and it invariably, I mentioned before we came online, I had Kelly and Juliet Starrett on here, who are definitely at the forefront of the fitness space, to say the least, on what they're doing. And kind of asked the same question, is like, is there hope for humanity? Because that's with a kid on the way. I'm like, what are we bringing this child into this world of, and what can we expect? And their response was specifically around fitness. And I know you have, and we haven't even touched on your fitness connections, let alone, because you got so much going on. But their kind of response, instead of, I think in my mind, it was like, when's Jack LaLanne coming back? When are we going to have like someone, a Pied Piper to lead us out of the gutters, as it were? And they were like, we have to be nodes in our community. That was their kind of takeaway. And I think they're incorporating into their new book, Built to Move. So that sounds like there's definitely a piece of that. And like you said, the local level, the impact we can make is pretty powerful. Curious on the political thing before we move on from that is, as you're talking again, and I'm not going to pretend to be on any side of any party or anything like that. I don't want to upset anybody. Oh my God. But are you familiar with Andrew Yang, the Forward Party? And again, the resonated piece here, or the thing that connects the dots for me, is you're talking common sense. And like, that's what really, I think he's a terrible candidate. I'm going to go ahead and call him out on that. He's making fun of Asian people, and, the things that are not going to end up getting you elected. But you look at his ideas of like, hey, automated trucks are coming. Maybe we should do something about this, get people ready. Because, once automated trucks are here, we're losing whatever it is, 80,000 jobs. Massive. Like that overnight. Yeah. On top of all the food, every stop along those routes, they're not going to get any more humans coming through. So like huge financial impact. And he's like, maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should take these malls that are now all going out of business and do something with that. That's going to improve things. Ranked choice voting. Like, and I'm not here to again, just advocate for him, but and I'm not necessarily for Andrew Yang and the Forward Party, which he started, but I'd be curious again, like, if you've looked into his stuff, and again, like, a third party is problematic in the grand political scheme. Again, I'm not going to pretend to be a political expert, but I'd definitely love to hear your thoughts, since you're an educated human, and this is where I get to learn. I call it Bo Knows Health, but this is really about Bo knowing more stuff, and I get people on who know more than me and tell me things. So tell me things, Rob.
No, I like your takedown of that. Like, Andrew Yang has a lot of really laudable characteristics, and holy smokes, if we want to get into like a controversial thing, like policing, but Andrew Yang had this perspective. He just threw out there. He's like, every cop should have a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. And I couldn't agree more. Right. Just the physical demands of the job should demand that these they are warrior athletes, and they should act as such. And it would be good for them. It'd be good for society. So much of this excessive force stuff. 85% of excessive force cases occur within 24 to 48 hours of a shift change. So it's somebody going from like night shift to day shift to night shift. And I can tell you what, when I'm sleep deprived, and you will be soon with a new one on the way, even if things go well, there's a little bit of sleep disruption. I'm an absolute dick when I'm sleep deprived, and so like there have been some suggestions that like somebody who's gone through a shift change, they should not be responding to calls on their own. They should be partnered up for some period of time until their body adapts to this stuff. There's some really small mitigating things that could avoid these like black swan events like a George Floyd, where you have this like egregious excessive use of force and my God, like the fallout from that. So I think Andrew Yang is really interesting, that he is at least sitting down and thinking about like, well, what are some practical, things to deal with this? I will do a shout out to Brett Weinstein, and he had put together this thing, the Unity Project, which was basically trying to get a honorable good actor from like the blue side of the field and an honorable good actor from the red side of the field, and that they would effectively run together, and that the first what it would be like a coin toss, and it's like, okay, you're president the first time, and then if they get elected the second go around, they literally switch. And what was interesting about that is the Unity Project was really gaining some remarkable momentum on social media, on Twitter in particular, and it was shut down. It was shut down. This thing that was just suggesting that we should get honorable representatives of both sides of the group and bring them together in a way that this power differential ends up getting mitigated, and it's not just team sports. That was so threatening to the establishment that like all the social media platforms shut that down. And Joseph Heller's book, Catch 22, they have this line in there that you're over the target when you're catching flak, and flak is the missiles and rockets and bombs that are going up at bombers during World War II. So I think there's something really interesting about that. Like ranked choice voting is really a fascinating option. So it's not just an either or type thing. There are some probably small structural changes that could be done, and it's all term limits. Like, who wouldn't be in favor of term limits? Like, do we really need somebody pointed out the other day, and this is a controversial topic because our founding fathers and their role in slavery and all kinds of different stuff, but the age of those people was between like 24 and 34. The people who founded like wrote the Declaration of Independence and wrote the Bill of Rights and whatnot. And I do think that there's some wisdom that comes with people as they get into later years, but there's also some disconnect that occurs. And, do we need a Speaker of the House who's like 80 years old and has been in politics for 45 years? It's so I think some simple things like that, like just term limits. And anybody who's against term limits, it's like, well, why are you against that? It's because you've found a way to enrich yourself at the expense of the populace, and if we don't enact some things like this, like some outside entities put the likelihood of like a warm going towards hot civil war in the United States as higher than it's ever been since the first Civil War. And like there are entities both inside the US and outside the US that would love that, because there are some people that just hate what what the US stands for, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but I really don't want to be in a civil war with my neighbors. That sure isn't going to be a good day for my children. It's not the way that I want to. I'm 50 years old. Hopefully I'm around another 20, 30, 40 years maybe, and I really don't want the waning years of my life to be spent watching society crumble around me. And I think that there are some really simple things that we have to come to the table with, and folks like Andrew Yang, folks like Brett Weinstein, who are putting these ideas out there. Like, we need to get fired up about just doing something to alter the way that there's this capture of the political and scientific process at this point, to bring those back into autonomous operational things, and put a timeline in how long people can be in there. Yeah.
And there's just parallels to the healthcare space and things that are coming up as you're talking with. We need to almost see the system crash and burn to rebuild it, including the political system. Because I talk to people on both sides of the aisle, and they're like, "Yeah, this system's screwed," and I'll say fucked. It'll become explicit now. But this, they're like, "Yeah, the system's terrible. I'm right, you're wrong. Team blue, like you said, team politics, all that stuff." And it's why are we not trying to make change? The same thing with regenerative farming. Oh, factory farming's terrible. I'm just going to switch and not eat meat. But it's like, but why don't we try to do something about it? Like, we can agree on the science that like we probably should be eating meat. Oh, we have incisors and our teeth have evolved to do this, that, or the other thing. And like, you want to argue this stuff versus saying like, what can we practically do on the ground? And does it take people either, again, completely crashing the system? I know Chris Kresser, I'm sure, another person I know you're very familiar with, unconventional medicine. I have right there.
Yep.
Talking about how, healthcare expenditure, I believe, will exceed GDP spending in the next 10 years. I think it was originally 2040, now it's down to 2030 or something like that. And when that happens, like the entire system crashes and collapses, a lot of the stuff you're talking about. And again, it's scary. And to somebody who's, again, having a kid come into the world and things like that, on top of the fact that we live in this world, like you're saying. And the question becomes, how do we see some of the solutions? And that's why, again, I'll defer to folks like you to like be the smarter folks and have done the research. And you are always humble and you're always like, oh, well, there's smarter people than me, and great. But like, that's the question, is when is someone going to rise up? and whether I'm calling you out here, Rob, we need you. And that's why like everyone's like, Jon Stewart becomes the guy, like, hey, like he needs to go and get cameras in people's faces. So these people are like, oh, they're looking at what we're doing. We won't, not give these people who suffer, the veterans and who have significant damage, we'll give them a little bit of thing, and like, sorry, yeah, we messed up, or like, almost, and not even admitting any wrongdoing there. But it takes someone like Jon Stewart, and there was the movie where Robin Williams, I think, ran as the comedian for president. Yeah. So stuff like that. I mean, it's crazy to see, and we're not even going to mention the Orange Man, of of how that all came together and all the negative and positive. But that's honestly, that was my silver lining again, of like, I think we're just going to see, he's clearly, and he did push a lot of envelopes, and it's like, maybe things will get better because we're going to expose a lot of these broken systems. But it still seems like, and with COVID is again showed, a lot of people are very unhealthy. A lot of people, we have really poor relationships with food, cardiovascular health, all these things that we can go into the science and geek out on. And you have, if anyone wants, again, Rob has hours and days, hours, years, millions of, I don't even know.
I should add that up, but there's probably like a year worth of material there at this point.
At least. Yeah. So like a full, like you can just sit down and listen to Robb Wolf for a full 365 days without stop. Just have him going. That's scary when you start doing some of that stuff. I know, just going back to the CrossFit thing, when I had James Fitzgerald, OPEX guy, as my coach for a year, I calculated out, and he's a big fan of rowing, and I did 500,000 meters. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Anyway, total tangent there. But the one other piece there, I'll say again, as Robb is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you bring up Brett Weinstein, and those are two of the things that I've tried to listen to Brett, and as much as I respect you and you respect him, I'm always like, I don't know about this guy. I don't know. And the same thing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm like, I don't know that I'm ready to just roll around on the floor and
get teabagged by people.
Exactly. Yeah. And but at the same time, it seems like there's a lot of really good benefits to these things. And again, I hear Brett Weinstein, and some of it, I'll be honest, just go as smart as I think I am. I'm like, it's going way over my head. And some of the stuff, again, just the personality. Some of the stuff is like, okay, like and say like a Jordan Peterson kind of controversial, is like, you sound a little arrogant, but like, I think I hear what you're talking about. And so that comes back to the question to me, to try to bring it all back, of rambling and ranting, and is I don't know, where will someone rise up? This next election cycle is going to be very interesting, obviously, as I guess every presidential election cycle is, and that's why we tend to focus on those, of like big personalities. Obviously there's implications all over the place of it, but on the lower levels, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is having an election coming up and stuff like that. Like, and she was a CrossFit owner, I'm sure you know. So just to speak to a little bit of the fun, all the data points connecting there. But where are you gonna go?
Oh no! I was just taking it all in. When Dave Dooley and I were still doing the Controversial Truth, I think we did one of our last shows where we kind of brought the show out of retirement after the 2016 election, because it was so controversial that Trump won, and there was all this kind of back and forth about it. And we just made the point that whether you're happy about that outcome or sad about that outcome, the fact that we're that concerned about the power that one person wields is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this has been this ongoing deal of kind of states' rights versus, consolidated federal power. And there's pluses and minuses to all of it, but it has become kind of a winner take all approach to this, like team sports, which historically the United States hasn't really operated that way. There's really, when you look back, there's been a pretty good change happens kind of glacially slow. There'll be a little bit of progressivism and then a little bit of conservatism and a little bit back and forth, and we kind of iteratively go. And now it's become this thing of kind of a cutthroat winner take all approach to this. And I think that that's a great way to get people mad enough to start killing each other. And I think that even the folks that are in power right now, like thinking about like Marie Antoinette and guillotines and stuff like that, it's kind of like, okay, I get it. You've got lots of money, you've got lots of power. If you're cool with living in a gated community and having 24/7, armed security monitoring you and your family, I guess that's okay. But is that really what you want? Like, do we want a world where that's where we go to? Historically, that hasn't really been the picture of the United States. That's been a bunch of the rest of the world, and we kind of look sadly at that, because the folks, all kinds of opportunities are lost and whatnot. And so I hope that we can get back. And again, I really think that the way that we get more control over whatever a thought is that when you really look at the political divide in the United States, there's some topics like abortion and gun ownership and different things like that. We're never going to be at a middle ground. And we're also going to be at this spot where if one side really tries to force its ideology uniformly across the whole population, it's going to be a disaster. And we need to figure out some way to be able to navigate that. And I think that moving things back to kind of a states' rights deal, and a lot of this stuff gets decided on more of a local level, and then people can move to areas that they feel more aligned with their ideological value systems, and maybe that ends up being bad. Maybe ultimately it ends up being bad, but otherwise, I think the option that you have is some sort of really horrible like re-education program, like one side wins and then there's a bunch of internment camps, and you only get out when you tick these ideological boxes, and maybe the internment camp now is that there's a social credit score that doesn't allow you to buy the food that you want to buy, to watch the shows you want to watch, to drive the car you want to drive, until
that's the
you
Black
get out
Mirror
of social...
episode.
Yeah. So it maybe doesn't look like Auschwitz type concentration or re-education camps, but there's some really terrible things that could roll out if we allow this stuff to gain more momentum and to continue to like hate and attack each other. And
Well, I was looking for some hope. I have less of it now.
Hope.
Thank you.
I think there's hope, but it's like people need to get people who were like, I would have never done a day of politics. Maybe you need to join your local school board.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to join your local city council. And I've attended a few meetings of that stuff. I mean, even our local homeowners association, you're just kind of like, oh my God, like kill me,
Yeah.
But otherwise, if you don't participate, then the funny thing is the people who do want to participate in those things, that actually kind of, they'll elbow some people out of the way to get in position to do it. They're not the people that you want running it. So
right. I think I'll give Joe Rogan credit for the whole thing of like, anyone who wants to run for president, be the president, probably isn't very equipped or whatever. And
you're a
and
crazy person wanting to do that.
And clearly, you have to be a egomaniac or narcissist or all these terms that get thrown out there. But anyway, we'll move on from that. And I want to be respectful of your time. My big takeaways, though, I want to, because we touched on so many different things. And again, you are a bit of a Renaissance man when it comes to these different topics, and we kind of jumped all over, and I love it. And again, folks, go check out all of Robb's content. Like we said, probably well over a year's worth of content. If anyone, we didn't even talk about Wired to Eat, which I think I still remember reading it on a Kindle on a train from Paris to somewhere in France, going to a wedding. Bretagne, that was the town, very famous for their crepes and cider.
Oh wow.
Fun time. But I remember reading your Wired to Eat, and for anyone, I'll just really quickly summarize the book of, it is not your fault that you're overeating. Basically, society has made it this way, but the other piece of that is it is your responsibility. And so, the whole that you can't eat just one potato chip kind of piece. And Robb has a background in biochemistry and understanding how these companies are again manipulating us and all that fun stuff. So very good book to read in terms of and I utilize all that stuff all the time. I actually utilize your sleazy car salesman concept when it
Right.
comes to paleo or the carb reset concepts, all these things that are kind of talked about in these pieces where, hey, just try this, see how you look, feel, and perform. 30 days, let's have a conversation, and let's
Right.
see where that goes. And then and like you said, again, like, hey, it's cool you want to push me on a statin, doctor, but can I also take some fish oil, and can I also do some other things? Can I continue to do my Brazilian jiu-jitsu or ramp that up or switch to a different type
Hmm.
of workout? So there's definitely places where, and we didn't even touch on Reno, was it the fire department there,
The
Nevada?
risk assessment
Risk
program. Yeah.
assessment program, all
Yeah.
that stuff. There's so much. But the takeaways I do want to give folks, and I'm going to try to take away as a little bit of hope and stuff that I've learned from you and actionable steps. Number one, have the go bag, because even back December 30th, we had fires that burned down 991 houses here. Could have been a lot more here in Superior and Louisville, Colorado. Even after that, first thing I was like, when we got back home and it turned out our house did not burn down, I was like, we should have a go bag, because we kind of grabbed random stuff, and
Yeah.
we did have our passports and things like that. But to your point of things happen, and they seem to be happening more and more frequently, at least. But yes, I made a list, and I didn't actually make the go bag, so I had the good intentions. But as lizard as our brains are, I do think stuff like that, actionable steps of this is that extra kick I needed, I think. But that's the thing, like, pain points still, to me, do not always push folks. And I
Yep.
think I've heard you talk about it as well, is like, hey, we're gonna have to cut off your leg. Do you mind stop eating like donuts and McDonald's? And they're like, no, I'm gonna keep doing that. Or hey, you have lung cancer, and okay, I'm just gonna smoke through my tracheotomy hole. There's definitely a lot of fascinating stuff to how our brains work as humans, and how we make change. And change psychology is something I'm fascinated in, and Robb talks about in a lot of his content. So go bag, number one. Local politics, number two. Get involved. There's change that can be made. Again, school lunches, things like that. But that's the thing, is it's whose voices are loudest, and then you get the folks who are like, hey, we want to have meatless Mondays, and meat is bad, and then you get those voices being a little bit louder, and not enough of the good guy voices, if you will, and depending on who you ask. So there's definitely a lot of powerful stuff there. But yeah, just if you're listening to this, hopefully you're somewhere aligned with some of the things we're talking about here. So there's definitely some impact we can make on local politics. The other one that, again, I took away from you and Diana Rogers, and a lot of the folks in that kind of paleo ancestral health space, which is some really cool stuff going on there, is go meet your local farmer. There are problems with that. Not everyone has access to that, but if you have access to that, go. And we have a great farm here, 7-generation farms, and I always kind of like, I want to push them and get everyone to go there, but I'm like, but then they're going to be out of all the liver and heart that I like to get. But I don't know if they're going to be able to up production so I can get what I need. So my own selfish, again, lizard brain. But yeah, I definitely want to shout out 7-generation farms. Again, they're about 7 minutes from me here. And that's where I go to get all my stuff. And I know that they're all very healthy. Sarah is the farmer, the main farmer I talked to there. And so go meet your local farmer, support that, and again, start improving this. The one thing I did want to ask you before we jump off is, I think, and I want to give you credit for, and for anyone again listening, is having listened to you since about 2010, you are not scared to change your mind on the science and things like that. And you saw some of the problems that happened with low carb diets, with high performing athletes, and that led you to the LMNT kind of concept. Like, hey, we're kind of missing the boat here, and so we're under sodiuming, things like that. So again, he's evolved, he's changed. I certainly hope to aspire to such things as well. But the question is, and I heard you say it, and I wanted to make sure I got this right from listening to you, is you have less emphasis on like grass-fed, grass-finished beef which is like the gold standard when it comes to, you know, folks being like, I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to go spend extra money on this, versus being like, you know what, conventionally raised is not that much worse for your health. You're still doing better. We should still be supporting maybe conventionally raised that's, you know, less feedlot and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to get your maybe quick soundbite political statement on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to do a soundbite on it, but it's one of the more controversial things in the book. And when the book and film cover the health, environmental, and ethical considerations of a meat-inclusive food system. So it's a lot. And the manuscript, when we turned it in, was 600 pages. Our editor did a great job. We got it down to just a hair under 300 pages, but it's honestly like of the three books I've written, it's the one I'm the most proud of. I think it'll probably stand the test of time, probably the best. But when we started off, we had a bunch of assumptions. Like we just, in outlining the book, there were all these assumptions, and one of the assumptions was pastured meat is nutritionally superior to conventional meat. And when we got in and actually then started studying the research on it, there's very, very little difference between pastured meat and conventional meat with regards to nutrition. Pastured meat has a little bit more omega-3s, but if you eat a 2-ounce piece of salmon, you need to eat, and you get the omega-3s out of that, you need to eat 8 pounds of pastured meat to get the same amount of omega-3s as you get from salmon. So it's not really the place that you're even looking for omega-3s, but
Right.
it's got this phenomenal protein, which has this unique ability to provide satiety so that we don't overeat. It has zinc, it has iron, it has B vitamins. You know, there's all this good stuff about it. But the nutritional delta, the difference between pastured and conventional meat, is just not that significant. And folks in the regenerative ag space felt abandoned, turned upon, you know, like,
Right. Right.
and they were like, well, what money are you getting from, you know, big meat? It's like, absolutely none. I will show you my tax returns, you
Right.
know, and like ConAgra is not a line item on that. And we actually hired an independent PhD nutritional biochemist to review all of that material there. And all that we told this guy was, hey, we just want a breakdown of the differences and similarities between pastured and conventional meat. And this guy went out and started researching, and he arrived at exactly the same position that we did. So from a sustainability perspective, from an ecological perspective, there's lots of reasons to lean into that pasture-based thing. But even then, it gets really squirrely, because if you live anywhere where there is a local brewery or winery or something like that, those folks almost certainly take the grain products that they use in making alcohol, and then they either have to landfill it, compost it, which landfilling sucks. You have to pay for it, and composting it is super time intensive because you got to turn this stuff over, or you give it to people to feed to animals. And that's an amazing way of nutrient upcycling this material and getting rid of it. But it's not technically pasture finished then. But it's a beautiful way to nutrient upcycle material that is part of our food system. And it's the way that we did things, you know, before the industrialization of our food system. Like historically, pork and chicken were not primary features of our food system. They were secondary background pieces, and it was like spoiled food, and things that were no longer fit for human consumption were what we fed to pork.
Right.
We don't do that now. Like we front load all that stuff, and so I think that pasture-based, it's worth mentioning, even the conventional meat that we get from like Costco or Walmart, it spends 80% of its life on grass. The last 20, 30% is in some sort of a feedlot scenario. And oftentimes that feedlot scenario is taking food residues like the leftovers from ethanol or wine production and whatnot, and feeding it to those animals. There's also kind of fucked up stuff where they feed it out of date candy. But the ironic thing about that is cows are, because they have these 4 house-rated stomachs, they're insanely good at turning crap food into actually nutrient dense, high value food. So even then, it's kind of like, as a biochemist, I look at what the conventional meat finishes as and what the pastured meat finishes as, and it's hard to see a huge difference there. And when we think about, say, like poor populations, marginalized populations that are one of the big distinguishers between a poor family versus a middle income family is the middle income family spends much more money on higher quality food in general.
Mm.
And when you look at like academic performance and growth and thriving versus failure to thrive, nutrition is a big deal. And so we should lean into that pasture based system. It's super important, and we cannot make that the good the enemy
Hmm.
of
Right.
perfection.
Perfect
Yeah,
enemy of good. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that. And it is, we end up with these narratives again of like, and the same thing back to the political piece, being like, hey, you can be like aligned with 17 of the 20 things of this political party, but it's okay to disagree on those three. You don't have to just
And
be
then
like,
maybe advocate for changing those. Yeah,
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 yeah. And that's the thing people seem to be missing. And again, we all, I think, get caught up in those traps. And again, even for me and my wife, we were literally talking about finding a meal plan and spending how much money we're budgeting for XYZ. And it's like, well, yeah, do we need grass-fed beef? And so now I can be like, hey, Rob said no. Real quick, same for wild-caught fish versus farm-raised fish.
Interestingly, pastured dairy is shockingly more nutritious than
Mm,
conventional dairy.
right.
Pastured eggs, amazingly more nutritious than conventional eggs. Wild caught versus farm fish, far more nutritionally
Okay.
sound. And there's a bunch of environmental reasons
Right.
to lean into those. But it interestingly, again, it's kind of this gotcha. Uh,
Mm,
it would have been great. It would have been like a vegan documentary film
right.
if there hadn't been this one thing, because it's like, oh, it's better for the environment, it's better for your
Yeah.
health. We didn't. It's really easy to disprove that point, and
Hmm.
we actually contemplated like either lying or glazing over this fact because we knew that there was going to be some
Yeah.
blowback on it. But there are other situations where like the pastured organic, that sort of stuff really do matter. But for the meat quality, and even people will make things are like, well, there's toxic residues in conventional meat. And
Hmm.
I'm a biochemist who has a background in toxicology. I would ask those people, show me the assay and
Yeah.
exactly what are the
Yeah.
toxic constituents that are in there. Is it
Hmm.
glyphosate? Is it residues from mycotoxin exposure? Occasionally, a group of animals will get a feed allocation of grains that have had a mold infestation, and they get a toxic dose of mycotoxin.
Yeah.
That does happen. It doesn't happen very often because it kills the animals. So
Mm,
folks really try to stay on top of making sure that that doesn't happen.
right.
But by and large, if we do 100 different samples of meat purchased at different locations, I would just ask people, um, are you as good on a HPLC GCMS as I am, and
Hmm.
can you do
Right.
an assay
Right.
and show me this stuff? And if you do, then I'll change my mind on it. But like
Yeah.
I've tried every angle I can to support that idea that like there's okay, I'll give you there's toxic constituents. I just don't see that either. Now I
Yeah.
see groundwater contamination, I see damage to ecosystems, I see all kinds of other problems, but we have to be really compartmentalized when we talk about this in a scientific way. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And that's where, again, like, this is the guy who knows what he's talking about. And it's funny, real quick, I'll finish on this. Again, I do need to go. So I feel bad that we got the OB appointment, but of course we can keep talking for hours and another year, as it were. But the funny thing I'll bring back to that whole piece is, a guy here, I talk politics. He's got some very strong beliefs one way, but we were talking about something scientific, student loan debt, and the way that's been going recently. And but I was like, it sounds like you don't quite understand how the science is done, and you're a little ignorant about the scientific process. Like, are you open to talking about like how I understand the science and how it's done? He said, hey, I might be ignorant about the science, but I wasn't born yesterday. And I'm like, but you're missing the thing, and that's where
Right.
someone like me gets frustrated. And maybe I don't have the vocabulary or the patience or whatever. And a lot of my friends are also like, when I tell them some of these stories, they're like, good for you for having patience to even engage with folks like this, because they're just like shutting off to your whole like kind of civil war point of that's the thing. We have no communication, and it's really hard to get across those aisles. But it's fascinating stuff. Again, we can talk about all that for hours. And again, Rob does touch on some of this stuff on Healthy Rebellion from time to time. And again, I wish there were more places we can get you to talk about all of this. And yeah, Brett Weinstein, I'd love to dive deeper into that, or learn more about him. And again, I've tried to listen to a few of his things, and I'll just say again, there's ways that it just turns me off, to be honest. And it's like, I still want to be like, but Rob likes him, and I like Rob, so it should A equals B, and then C, and then D.
I see myself as kind of the blue collar dark horse podcast. Like Brett's kind of the academic, like white collar level, and I kind of do what they're doing, but at a blue collar level. So it's maybe a little more accessible.
And maybe that's what it is again, as much as I have a doctorate and think of myself as kind of white collar and academic in that way, I'm still got that blue collar in me to some extent. So
yeah, but what have you and I done a lot of? Like running brick and mortar facilities, like looking people in the eye and working with them. And I think that's not to say that like the Weinsteins didn't, like they were college professors and they taught kids for years, but it's a different
and that
university is a different deal than like running a brick and mortar facility where you've got to like wow people and really provide some serious value to them. Yeah.
And similar to Andrew Yang, I mean, the big controversy that Brett Weinstein was in at his university, I forgot what the thing was, that he either made a statement or he was going to get canceled, but there's videos of him like trying to be like, what are you guys talking like, but he couldn't bridge that gap. Well, that's where some of it, like, and that's not necessarily where I have my problem with him or whatever, but there's like, he's missing that like human connections. Like, that's a chance for you to say like, I hear you guys, like, and connect across that aisle, as it were. And they were just like mad. And there was a lot of very different populations, very different approaches. And anyway, we can go down that path another time, but
absolutely.
Rob, we barely touched on the LMNT. And again, that's one of those other pieces. Final takeaway is making change, being the change you want to see in the world. And Rob has done that, and has seen like, hey, there's this gap. And almost every endurance athlete I've talked to, and again, being here in Colorado, and you did mention the folks with breweries. There's like a brewery here, like a Starbucks. There's probably more breweries here than Starbucks, which is the first time I've ever lived in a place where that's a case. But anyway, I have a feeling we'll be moving somewhere closer to Montana some point based on how things are going. But hey, we'll see.
Come visit us, hang out. We'll put you guys up, and we'll show you the sites.
That would be awesome for sure. I have it recorded here, so we will take you up on that. And I just had oh man, I'm blanking on his name. Maui Athletics. I just had him on a few episodes ago, and I feel really bad I'm blanking on his name, but he's in Maui, in Hawaii. And I'm like, by the end of this podcast, I want you to be my best friend. So I have a place to visit and stay in Maui. So same thing here in Montana. And I don't know if you almost look like you froze there, but on that note, with my open invitation to come visit Montana, and sounds really friggin', again, we haven't even driven up there, so, and it's not too far from where we are. So I definitely plan to be up there sometime soon. But thank you so much, Rob, for your time. I gotta get to my wife before she stabs me in the throat. I need to learn the Brazilian jiu-jitsu defense grapplings so I can protect myself from my own
jiu-jitsu isn't that helpful with edged weapons, so just avoid that entirely. Yeah.
There was a quick little meme of like how to use Brazilian jiu-jitsu against a bear, and like they take you through the 7 steps of like, do this and then jump on its neck and then da da da. And the last one was like, forget all that, because by step 1 you were pretty much dead.
You were eaten.
Like, you were eaten. Yeah. So anyway, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your common sense, the things you're bringing into this world to be in the positive change. Again, if folks can't tell, I'm fanboying out here, and again, just really grateful for the books, the content, the free podcast, and a lot of it's free. And the only thing he's peddling here is salt. And again,
even on that, we
give that away. Yep.
We give you how to make it yourself.
Yep.
So
And literally, I've had 2 or 3 people who I've like tried to push my salt on Salt Dealer, and they're like, "Can I just make this on my own?" I'm like, "Yep, here's the recipe." Like, they give it away, and I'm like, I don't know if you want to store that much sodium, magnesium, and potassium in your garage. That might not end well, for many reasons. And ordering that much too might throw up some red flags in different areas.
Just don't have any ammonium nitrate with it, and you'll be fine. Yeah,
that'll be fine. But yes. So again, thank you, Rob. We'll sign off. I gotta go, but yeah, if anyone wants to learn more about Robb, again, he can be found pretty easily. 2 B's, 1 F. Always a little tricky from time to time for some folks, but thank you so much, Robb.
Thanks,
Appreciate you.
Doc.
I
Take care.
hope folks got at least 1% better, and we'll sign.